When Metal Gear Solid 2, Hideo Kojima's future-predicting masterpiece, came out in 2001, it was exclusive to the PlayStation 2. However, 2 years later, Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance Edition was released not only on PS2 but also on Xbox and PC. And later in 2011, the Metal Gear Solid HD Collection was released on PS3, Xbox 360, and PlayStation Vita, and it included MGS2. So, while the PC version of MGS2 exists, is it the best way to play it on PC? What about emulating all these other console versions? In this video, we're going to answer all of these questions.
James Johnson.
The president?
Unless the demands are met, the terrorists intend to blow the big shell out of the water.
We're going to start by looking at the PS2 version of Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance running on PCSX2, the PS2 emulator. I've picked the Substance Edition over the original Sons of Liberty Edition because Substance includes a lot more exclusive content than the original edition, including the skateboarding minigame that's not available in any other version of the game. But aside from the content differences, the technical aspects of the game running on PCSX2 that I'm going to talk about next apply to the original Sons of Liberty Edition as well. Anyway, so how does the game run on PCSX2? Well, for starters, it only supports 4:3 aspect ratio. If you enable the widescreen hack, you will see parts of the screen that are not properly rendered, along with stretched pre-rendered cutscenes and UI, and some misaligned lighting effects, so I wouldn't recommend it. Aside from that, there are a few minor graphical issues with the emulation. Firstly, when running the game with the basic blending accuracy setting, which is the default one, some textures appear a lot darker than they should. You can fix this by setting the blending accuracy setting to high, but it will make the emulator heavier to run. In the past, this would make the game run too slow, but recent versions of PCSX2 run a lot better, so even with blending accuracy on high, I was able to run the game at 60 FPS on my i5-9600K PC. I've only seen a few minor FPS drops during certain cutscenes that didn't affect the gameplay experience. Now, the second graphical issue is related to a slow-motion low FPS filter that appears in certain cutscenes. Whenever this filter is used, the image is rendered at the native resolution of the PS2, even if you're playing at higher resolutions like 1080p or 4K. But again, these scenes are short and the lower resolution doesn't ruin the experience. The third graphical issue is related to the depth of field effect using the cutscenes. Basically, the effect doesn't work at resolutions higher than the native PS2 resolution. Not only that, you can see harsh lines where the effect is supposed to start on screen. And finally, the pre-rendered videos that appear during certain codec conversations are pretty low quality, with visible compression artifacts and dithering.
Everything's changed.
Another thing that needs to be mentioned is the pressure-sensitive buttons. The DualShock 2, PlayStation 2's controller, had pressure-sensitive buttons, and the feature was used for a couple of actions in MGS2. Those actions were putting a pistol away after aiming it without firing, and aiming assault rifles without firing. That means that to perform these actions, you would need a controller that has pressure-sensitive buttons like the DualShock 3. However, PCSX2 offers a workaround, using a modifier button. Basically, you bind a button as a pressure modifier. In this case, I chose L3, which is not used by the game. Then you set the modified pressure level. For this to work on MGS2, it needs to be about 9%. Then, in-game, when you hold the modifier button, any face buttons that are pressed will register the modified pressure instead of 100%. So you can put your pistol away by pressing L3 while holding square, and you can aim a rifle without shooting by holding L3 and square simultaneously. If you let go of L3, you will start to fire as the pressure goes back to 100%. This footage was recorded using a DualSense, which does not have pressure-sensitive buttons, and as you can see, it works. Now here are all of the settings I've used for this video. Anyway, While it does have a few minor issues, PCSX2 is still a great way to play MGS2. This is the most authentic version of the game, as MGS2 was originally developed for the PS2. And PCSX2 even allows you to play it in the original resolution, which provides a nostalgic experience and fixes most graphical issues. But MGS2 was ported to many platforms over the years, so we have many versions to look at. Next, let's take a look at the OG Xbox version of MGS2 Substance running on Xemu, an Xbox emulator. This version of MGS2 Substance includes most of the extra content like VR missions and snake tails, but it doesn't include the skateboarding minigame. However, this version also has multiple differences compared to the original PS2 version, starting with the raindrops, which are thinner and much more transparent than on PS2, making the effect almost invisible on Xbox. Then, there's this scene in which the lightning and stealth camo effects are much less pronounced. Also, most particle effects run at double speed, making a lot of scenes look different. Additionally, some water particle effects seem to be completely missing. And there's also the textures, which have a lot of color artifacts and look a lot uglier. Anyway, these are some of the differences, but you get the idea. This version doesn't look quite as good as the PS2 version, but still looks okay. Now what about the emulation on Xemu? Like the previous option, it only supports 4:3 aspect ratio. There's no widescreen hack available as far as I know. Aside from that, there are a few visual glitches. Firstly, some transparent textures like hair don't look quite right. And other transparent things like Otacon's glasses have this weird checkerboard pattern on them.
I'm at the sneak point. Everything going okay? Still.
There's also a visible seam on the edges of the screen when there are black bars during cutscenes.
Show your face.
You men.
And much like on PCSX2, the depth of field doesn't work at high resolutions. Now let's talk about performance. Unfortunately, MGS2 runs pretty poorly on Xemu. In large areas like the first one, it ran very slowly on my PC, even at native resolution. In this footage, the game was only running on 2 times the native resolution, which already made the performance a bit worse. Since the game was programmed with a fixed time step of 16.6 milliseconds, when the frame rate drops below 60, the game plays in slow motion, so it's pretty hard to enjoy it like this. And on top of that, the emulator crashed multiple times while recording this video. One last thing I need to talk about is the controls. Apparently, Xemu does not support pressure sensitivity, as far as I know. So there's no way to put your pistol away without shooting or aiming a rifle without shooting. Anyway, here are the settings I've used for this video. So, I think it's pretty clear that this is not a great way to play the game, at least for now. So let's move on. The next option is the PC version of MGS2 Substance, which was sold on GOG.com until November 2021, when it was temporarily removed from the store. Although as of May 2023 it still hasn't been re-released on GOG.com, it might be in the future. So let's take a look at it.
Russian choppers.
First of all, the most important thing to mention about the PC version is that you absolutely need to install a fan mod called VSFix. All of the footage shown in this video is using it. This mod is extremely important because it fixes a lot of the issues that this PC port has, including graphical, sound, and controller issues. So with that out of the way, how is this PC port? Well, to be honest, it's not very good even with these fixed. This PC port was based on the Xbox version of the game, so unfortunately, it inherits all of the issues that version has. For example, in a scene where a snake lands on the tanker, the effects look worse than on PS2. The raindrops are pretty much invisible.
I know the drill. We're not terrorists.
The particle effects run at double speed, and so on. Even the dirty-looking textures of the Xbox version are present, and honestly, to me they look even worse on the PC version. In addition to the issues inherited from the Xbox version, the PC port has a few issues itself, even with these fixed. Normally, the PC version would be limited to 4:3 aspect ratio as well as the other versions, but VSFix allows it to run on widescreen aspect ratios. It also has an FOV fix, so it doesn't show parts of the screen that are not properly rendered. The FOV fix only works during gameplay though, and if you hide the black bars during cutscenes, you will see parts of the screen that were not meant to be shown. Another issue is the UI, which has low resolution and is stretched when playing in widescreen. There's also an issue with certain overlays during cutscenes, such as the color filter in this scene. Notice how there's a gap at the bottom of the screen. This also happens with the camera overlay. Aside from that, there's also a problem with the transparent textures like hair, as you can see in this scene. And much like the other options seen before, the depth of field doesn't work.
Metal Gear development and expose it to the world.
There's also a few objects that seem to update at half frame rate, like the rope in this scene, but you can fix this problem using a mod that forces the cutscenes to always run at 60 FPS. However, this mod has the side effect of making the slow-mo filter run at 60 FPS as well, which is not exactly how it was intended to look, but not that big of a deal either. And finally, the audio quality is significantly lower than other versions. So, it's clear that this PC port has a lot of issues. However, there are a few good points to this version. The most obvious one is the performance. Since it's a PC game and not running on an emulator, it is the best performing option by far. It will run well even on low-end PCs. And VSFix allows the game to run internally at 8K for super sampling, which is how it's running on all of the footage in this video. VSFix also provides a solution to the pressure-sensitive actions. By holding the left analog stick pressed, you can put your pistol away without shooting, and aim a rifle without shooting. The PC version is also the option that has the quickest loading times. And finally, there's one mod that offers a unique experience not available in any other option. It's a mod that adds a third-person freely rotating camera to the game. It works exactly like the third-person camera introduced in MGS2 Subsistence Edition. It's quite an interesting way to play the game, and seems to work very well. A link to this and other mods mentioned before is in the description, and here are the settings I've used.
Freeze!
Now, despite all of the issues, I'd say this is still an okay way to play the game, but we have more versions to look at, so let's move on. In 2011, Konami released an HD collection of MGS games which included MGS2. And this collection was released on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation Vita. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Xbox 360 version of Metal Gear Solid 2 HD Edition, running on Xenia, the Xbox 360 emulator. Here, I'm using the latest Canary version of Xenia at the time of this video's recording. Before looking at the emulation, let's talk about the HD edition. Unfortunately, like the PC port, the HD version of MGS2 was made using the Xbox version as a base, not the original PS2 version. So yes, most of those issues are present in the HD version as well, such as the barely visible raindrops,
We're not terrorists.
Very good. Don't you
missing effects on snakes landing, particle effects running at double speed, less water particles, and so on. At least one issue was fixed, and that is the textures, which don't have artifacts and look much better. In addition to the Xbox version issues, the HD edition has a few minor issues of its own. The main one is that the color filters are missing on cutscenes like this one. Other than that, there are a few minor differences like Otacon's glasses not being transparent anymore,
loud and clear, Snake?
Kept you waiting.
and the sea texture being stretched. However, there are a few improvements introduced in the HD edition that aren't available in other versions. The first one is proper support for 16:9 widescreen. The framing and FOV on cutscenes and gameplay have been properly adjusted for the new aspect ratio, and the black bars have been removed. Pre-rendered cutscenes are properly framed and higher quality as well.
21. That's about tactical IT deployment, right?
Another improvement is the depth of field, which now works properly at high resolutions, unlike the older versions.
Try to avoid confrontations. Our goal is to collect evidence.
And the last improvement is the UI, which has been completely redesigned for high resolutions in 16:9 aspect ratio. It definitely looks much sharper and cleaner than other versions. So let's talk about the emulation on Xenia. First of all, you can't run this game at any resolution higher than native, unfortunately. That's because there's a bug when you raise the internal resolution that makes the screen flicker like you see in this footage, so you're stuck to 720p with this game on Xenia. There's at least the option to use FSR 1.0, which is an upscaling filter that tries to make the edges smoother and reduce aliasing. I'd say it's better than nothing, so the rest of the footage in this video is 720p with FSR enabled. With that out of the way, the game runs mostly fine on Xenia. I've seen no performance drops on my PC, and since the Xbox 360 controller doesn't have pressure-sensitive buttons, this version natively fixes that issue. You can press the left analog stick to put your pistol away without shooting, and to aim a rifle without shooting. The only other things worth mentioning are that the image is a bit darker than other versions, and the water surface and bodies of water that you can swim in are glitched and appear fully opaque. As for the settings I've used, the only ones I've changed from default settings are these. With all things considered, this option is a good one overall. It properly supports 16:9 widescreen, doesn't require pressure-sensitive buttons at all, and has a nice clean HD UI. The only major issue is the inability to raise the resolution from 720p. But there's at least one more version to look at, so let's move on. Finally, let's take a look at the PS3 version of MGS2 HD Edition running on RPCS3, the PS3 emulator. Like the previous option, this is the HD edition of MGS2, so it has the same characteristics explained before, the inherited Xbox issues and the new HD version changes. I won't describe those again since it's pretty much the exact same version as the Xbox 360 one. So let's talk about the emulation on RPCS3. The good news is that you can increase the resolution on RPCS3 without any glitches, unlike Xenia. Here it is running at 3840 by 2160, and combined with the new UI on the HD edition, the game looks awesome. I have encountered no visual glitches on RPCS3 whatsoever. The only minor issue I've found is that the codec calls take a little bit longer to load than other options. As for performance, this option is the heaviest one for sure. It requires a reasonably good CPU to run, Although when talking about PS3 games running on RPCS3, this is not really on the heavier side. It's just that compared to the other options seen so far, RPCS3 is quite a complex emulator, so it will perform worse than those options. Still, on my i5-9600K, I'm able to run it at 60 FPS with no issues. I'll leave a link in the description to a CPU tier list for RPCS3, so you can compare it with your CPU and have an idea of how it will perform. I'd say that a B tier CPU from that list is probably good enough to run this game at 60 FPS. Lastly, there are a couple of things I need to mention. First, pressure sensitive buttons are required for the aiming stuff. However, like PCSX2, you can use a pressure modifier key to perform those actions on a controller that doesn't have pressure sensitive buttons. It works pretty much the same as on PCSX2. You bind a button to it, assign a pressure level, and when you hold it, the face buttons will be at that level of pressure. The other thing I need to mention is that apparently there's a bug that can crash the emulator at the end credits cutscene if you have trophy notifications enabled, so make sure to turn that off. Now, here are the settings I've used for this video.
Solid snake.
The hero of Shadow Moses? So that's why you changed my code.
So, overall, this is a great option to play the game on PC. It fully supports 16:9 widescreen and looks very nice in 4K. The only downsides are the differences to the original PS2 version and slightly longer load times for codec calls. Now, there's one last version of the game that I was going to look at, which is the PlayStation Vita version running on the Vita 3K emulator. But as you can see from the footage, the emulator is still underdeveloped and unable to run the game properly yet. After reviewing all of these options, we're left with a few alternatives. I'd say the most modern looking option to play MGS2 is using RPCS3. If you have a good enough CPU, it's the sharpest looking option with the cleanest UI and the best image quality. However, if you prefer having all of the graphical effects as they were meant to be seen, you'll have to go with the PCSX2. You will be limited to 4:3 aspect ratio, and the UI won't look as good in 4K, but every graphical effect is preserved. And finally, if your PC isn't very powerful, or if you want to try out the third-person camera mod, the PC version is the option for you, as long as you can acquire it somehow. Anyway, this video took a lot of work to make, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hands over your head, now! Toss your gun overboard, slowly. A woman. Show your face.
You men, you're all the same.
Who are you?
We are nomads, wanderers.